The Prime Minister returned to work after he contracted coronavirus and told us today that the lockdown will continue, saying we're at the moment of maximum risk. Our political correspondent Simon Harris went to Boris Johnson's constituency in Uxbridge to find out what people there made of it.
This is what lockdown looks like on Boris Johnson's High Street. 5 weeks after the Prime Minister told everyone to stay at home, people in his Uxbridge constituency are learning to live with social distancing. There were queues for the bank and at the baker's, but most shops are shut along with cafes and restaurants. And it's not likely to end any time soon, as Mr Johnson made clear on his first full day back in Downing Street.
I refuse to throw away all the effort and the sacrifice of the British people and to risk a second major outbreak and huge loss of life and the overwhelming of the NHS. And I ask you to contain your impatience, because I believe we are coming now to the end of the first phase.
So, are the Prime Minister's constituents happy to comply with his request and contain their impatience?
Yes, I've got a lovely garden and I'm very patient.
You should be able to see your family and stuff.
It should continue. Let it die out completely, and then when it's resolved, then we can go back to normal lives.
Staying at home, definitely. I think it is working. It's too early to go back. Too early to go back.
I do feel we've got to start getting back on track and weighing up one against the other, and yes, I am impatient.
Lockdown was supposed to mean only essential shopping trips, but Londoners, it seems, are adapting the rules.
We speak with a lot of our customers, how are you doing during this period? And a lot of them say during their hours exercise, they'll come and get their lunch and then they'll take it back home.
There are encouraging signs that London has passed the peak of infection. In the capital's hospitals, the number of people being treated for the virus has been going down for about 3 weeks. And the number of people dying every day in London hospitals has also dropped. In characteristic language, the Prime Minister put it like this.
If this virus were a physical assailant, an unexpected and invisible mugger, which I can tell you from personal experience it is, then this is the moment when we have begun together to wrestle it to the floor.
But also, he said, the moment of maximum risk if people start to think they can relax the rules. Simon Harris, ITV News, Uxbridge.
Good evening. On the day Londoners remembered with a minute's silence the brave frontline workers who have lost their lives in this COVID pandemic, the Mayor warned he could go further to protect TfL employees. Sadiq Khan told this programme he is set to defy ministers and order bus passengers in London to wear face masks. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has more.
For London's bus drivers, this has become personal. Too many of them are being taken by the virus. At Camberwell Garage in South London, the drivers needed no encouragement to pause and quietly remember those who've died. Like health workers, bus drivers can't stay at home. And like some health workers, they fear they're in danger because they're not adequately protected.
As for face masks, we've not been given any, but the hand sanitizer and gloves, that's the only thing we are using at the moment.
34 Transport for London workers have died since the outbreak began. The majority of them are bus drivers. Passengers are now banned from using the front door on buses. But the Mayor thinks ministers should order passengers to wear masks. And if they don't, he might do it anyway.
If it's the case that despite all our lobbying and the evidence and the emerging scientific evidence, the government doesn't change its guidance, I may well decide unilaterally to instruct Londoners to do that going forward.
The Mayor doesn't have to ask the government to do it. He can ask them that. And right just now, if you provided those masks, I'm sure that the passengers would willingly wear them.
Today's silence was marked by emergency workers across London, at police stations and fire stations. This was Soho. Some firefighters have been trained up as ambulance drivers. Others are helping to collect the bodies of victims who die at home. London Ambulance Service workers also had a reason to honour those who've lost their lives.
We at London Ambulance Service have sadly lost 3 of our own colleagues through this emergency. So the chance to stand and pay our respects with a minute's silence was one that we absolutely wanted to take up. And it really just makes me incredibly proud.
At any other time, a minute's silence in the workplace would be a chance for colleagues to reflect together. Not easy in the era of social distancing. In Downing Street, the Prime Minister was joined by the Cabinet Secretary and Chancellor. Labour's newly elected leader, Sir KEIR Starmer, was alone with his thoughts. And at Westminster Abbey, members of the clergy stood apart, maintaining a respectful distance.
And Simon, the issue of face masks once again raised at the government's daily press conference.
Yes, we know the government's somewhat secretive scientific advisory group met last week to discuss masks. What we don't know yet is what the scientists decided. But at the Downing Street press conference this afternoon, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, made it clear he's still not convinced about going down the masks for all route.
The UK government position hasn't changed, not least because the most important thing people can do is the social distancing. As opposed to the weak science on face masks, there is very clear science on social distancing.
And Simon, let's go to that big developing story in the last hour. British Airways making 12,000 workers redundant.
Yes, this is a huge blow for thousands of British Airways workers, many of them working at the company's main base, Heathrow, but also at Gatwick and London City. Now, nobody living under the flight paths can have failed to have noticed in recent weeks that the skies are clear, and British Airlines are some of the big casualties of coronavirus. Now British Airways becomes the biggest of them all. With so many fewer passengers flying, so many fewer passengers paying fares, so many fewer planes in the air, it was inevitable that British Airways was going to have to do something. It's already taken some emergency action, putting more than 22,500 of its staff on furlough. It's sent much of its old Boeing 747 fleet to the scrapyard a few years earlier. Now comes this news, an announcement tonight that British Airways has begun a formal consultation with the trade unions about what it calls a restructuring and redundancy programme. And it looks as though it's going to lead to, as you say, 12,000 redundancies. Across the board, we expect that to be ground staff, pilots and cabin crew. And perhaps more worrying is that the airline has predicted that it's unlikely to recover its business back to anything like pre-COVID-19 levels until several years' time.
Incredibly worrying for the staff then this evening. Simon, thank you.
Good evening. The Prime Minister is back in Downing Street tonight after spending the day with his fiancée, Carrie Symonds. Their new baby was born this morning, a baby boy. It meant Boris Johnson missed Prime Minister's questions at lunchtime, but he will not be taking paternity leave yet because of the coronavirus crisis. Well, over the last 24 hours, the number of those who have died in the capital with COVID-19 has risen again. And there are further calls for better equipment to protect those on the front line. More on that in a moment, but first here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
When the Prime Minister and his partner were last seen in public together, they had no idea what was about to hit them. In early March, they were at Westminster Abbey. Less than 3 weeks later, he fell ill and almost died. The Prime Minister's now back at work. Yesterday, he joined the National Remembrance for Victims. But as if recovering from illness and planning the country's future isn't enough of a challenge, he now has another, being a new dad. Culvia Ranger has known him for 20 years. As a senior advisor at City Hall, he helped him launch the so-called Boris bikes.
He has a huge challenge that the country faces with this crisis. He personally has had that challenge of being unwell, but I think this will be something that can bring that joy, a distraction in a positive way for him while he does deal with those other things.
Downing Street released a statement saying the PM and Miss Symonds would like to thank the fantastic NHS maternity team. In Parliament, the Speaker offered the congratulations of MPs.
On behalf of everyone in the House of Commons, may I say congratulations to the Prime Minister and Carrie Symonds on the birth of their son. Such happy news amid such uncertainty. 2020 is certainly a year they will never forget.
The new arrival meant Mr Johnson again missed Prime Minister's questions. He still hasn't faced his new opponent across the dispatch box. The Labour leader has been adding up how many Britons he thinks have died.
That makes a total to date, Mr Speaker, of 27,241 recorded deaths from coronavirus. And that's probably an underestimate because of the time lag.
Sir KEIR suggested the UK was on track to have the worst death rate in Europe.
I absolutely share his, I guess, our joint horror at the number of deaths. Tragedies, each and every one. Equally, I'm going to disagree with him that it is far too early to make international comparisons.
Whatever the true figure, it's a stark reminder of the task ahead. And the virus poses unique challenges too for Carrie Symonds. Hannah Corder from Ashted in Surrey is also a new mum and unable to introduce baby Noah to her family.
It makes you incredibly sad. I see Noah changing. He changes every single day. And he's doing things every single day. So he's now started smiling and he's engaging and he's focusing on things. And his little personality is coming out. And we're filming it so we can send it to them. But it's not the same as actually having them here.
A short time ago, Downing Street released this picture of the Prime Minister back inside number 10.
Simon, safe to say the Prime Minister has a huge amount on his plate at the moment.
Yesterday, the official death toll based on people who've died in hospitals was a little under 22,000 for the whole of the UK. Today, that figure has been revised to more than 26,000 because for the first time, it takes into account people who've died in care homes and in their own homes. But it's still slightly less than 27,000 KEIR Starmer thinks it is, but still well above the 20,000 that government scientists were hoping not to exceed at the start of the crisis. And if that's not worrying enough for the Prime Minister, they still only managed 52,000 tests in 24 hours, a target of 100,000 tomorrow.
Yeah, all right, Simon, thank you.